Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. Welcome back to another video. And this is an all about Noni Madueke special. I've been doing a bajillion of these specials because it feels like Chelsea have been signing a player about every other day at this rate. And I'm super excited to be joined by my good friend Rob, who is also a bit of a transfer guru. So Rob, thanks so much for joining. How's it going?
Yeah, I'm very good, thank you. It's interesting, isn't it? The number of signings that are being made in what is a generally very quiet window. It's a very very exciting one, I think, for Chelsea fans.
Yeah, so let's jump right into it. Why did Chelsea target him? Because we're seeing that we're signing a lot of attacking midfielders. I saw
Mhm.
some pictures on Twitter of just like a starting 11 with all the attacking players and then like a goalkeeper and one defender.
Mm.
So why are Chelsea targeting him, given the amount of attackers that we have and have already signed?
Well, I'd say with Noni Madueke, it's an interesting option. Chelsea did look at the player several years ago when he first left Tottenham. He made the very bold decision to go to PSV Eindhoven and go and play regular minutes rather than go into the English loan system at the time. And then the other sort of big thing I think supposed to know with this is that this signing is very much being driven by Christoph Vivell. Vivell wanted to bring in Madueke into RB Leipzig last summer because they view him as the long-term replacement, or indeed in his mind as a long-term replacement for Christoph Nkunku. Now, obviously, it's a lesser-known secret that Christoph Nkunku will be joining Chelsea in the summer. Although it hasn't been formally announced, the RB Leipzig CEO is at a point where he says it's well known. So I think we can sort of say that that's happening. But certainly Leipzig liked him because of the fact he's seen as versatile. He can play across the front three, and when he does tend to play, he tends to be very impactful. The biggest issue with the player over the last 18 months, at least, has been the injury record. He has missed 43 games over the last two seasons, but there is certainly a very high amount of potential there, and this sort of links in with why it's a very much an RB sort of style signing. The data looks very good on the player. He has a high potential to improve, and he's the sort of player that you could very much clearly see stepping into a role and replacing another player and doing it quite seamlessly.
Interesting. And so, where's he going to play at Chelsea? What's his style? Do you think that he's going to slide right into the starting 11? He's a young player, so maybe
Mhm.
we don't see him for a while. How do you predict that kind of happening?
I mean, ideally, I think Chelsea would like to try and bed him in and try and use him as more of maybe a dynamic option off the bench. He's incredibly fast. He's incredibly direct. He is a real dribbler with the ball. He likes to carry it. He's got very good carry statistics in the league and has high instance rates for being able to create things and make stuff happen when he does play. He also isn't averse to shooting. He does like shooting from the edge of the box, shooting from range, and also shooting from inside the box. He's one of the interesting phenomena that we started to see in terms that he's a winger who plays on the right, but he prefers to cut inside and use his left, and very much prefers to cut inside and use the left foot, a la Iron Robben. However, he is also not quite as one-footed. I'd say he does have the ability to go around on the outside and use his his weaker foot as per se, but it isn't as reliable. I would be happy to sort of submit that. What I will note is that I think Chelsea are going ahead and getting this deal done at the moment because they feel that it's the sort of player that could increase in value quite quickly. And as we've seen with other Dutch sort of clubs, we've seen Cody Gakpo, for example, where the price was 30 million in the summer and he's now gone for near a 54 sort of million euro. Anthony, who they reject a 30 million pound bid for the player, and then a year later they accept 100 million euros. The Dutch clubs do have a tendency to set pricing for players in quite a prohibitive manner. And unless they have release clauses, they tend to try and make sure they get the absolute maximum for the player. Now, what I do think with Madueke is that we might see him earlier than planned because of the number of injuries Chelsea have in the attack and the fact that I still think, I think it's unlikely that Hakim Ziyech will stay at the club before the end of the window, despite the fact he's playing at this moment in time, due to the fact that I think he will want, he wants to go elsewhere. Pulisic is obviously injured and his long-term future is uncertain at the club. There are, João Felix is only in on loan at this moment in time, and so you've got a impact on him for the next 6 months, but after that you don't know. There are longer-term question marks over Kai Havertz. There is a lot of change potentially happening in the attack, and I frequently banged the drum last summer, and I was a bit surprised it didn't happen in a more dramatic manner. That Chelsea would have ideally liked to replace the entire attack last summer, and they made it very, very clear that they wanted to try and replace pretty much everyone in the attack. They felt it was underperforming, which is why you've gone out and seen them go and sign Mihajlo Mudryk. You've seen them, bring in Noni Madueke. There's interest still in Marcus Thuram. I don't think it will happen this window, but there still is interest there. There's been interest in Youssoufa Moukoko. Obviously, he's now signed a new deal at Borussia Dortmund, so you can scratch him off the list. Christopher Nkunku has obviously, come in for the summer. Yeah, Felix has come in on loan. There has been a real, feeling that there have been maybe historic issues with the attack that haven't been resolved, and it was a case that in the summer, maybe following the change of coach that sort of happened following the summer window, there was a much needed gravitas and sort of urgency to make this happen.
Mm-hmm. That's so crazy. Like, I'm just trying to digest what you've just said. So kind of looking at all of this, how do you think that Chelsea might realistically line up? Let's say post Liverpool, because the game is tomorrow. So I don't think that we're going to see Madueke come in just for that game. But like you said,
I don't know. I honestly, I don't know. I mean, they're trying to get the paperwork done before the Liverpool game for a reason. And the thing I would say with Madueke is that he is the sort of player that he's unpredictable, is the best way I would describe him. They have until, I think, 12 o'clock UK time to register the paperwork and get it all done. We saw it happen with the João Felix deal, where they announced it right after, they announced it just after 12 o'clock and then announced they'd got the paperwork in. And I think with the nature of how Liverpool are at the moment, certainly from a defensive point of view, they will maybe look at someone like, Mudryk and Madueke, of players they won't necessarily know a lot about. And it's the sort of players you can bring in as wildcards. And I think, you saw this to an extent with João Felix, for example. People know roughly what João Felix is going to do. And obviously his debut was, a checkered experience. But what I will say from an attacking point of view, you did clearly see that he offers some unpredictability. And that's the definite thing I would use to describe Noni Madueke. He is so direct and deliberate in his work. And at times it doesn't come off. I will urge people, they have to be patient. This is not a finished article Chelsea are signing here. But he's someone who is so, exciting and direct. And his pace will really frighten defenders. He is an incredibly, incredibly quick player. He's an incredibly direct player. And that's why I really like the signing. Because I think, one thing Chelsea have really lacked in their wingers is directness.
Exactly. And it seems like that's something that the board is targeting, like fast, pacey wingers who are direct, good 1v1. So how do I dare ask, how do you think we'll line up versus Liverpool? And then maybe extending the question, how do you think we might line up post-January transfer window? Like, do you think that we'll see a couple of outgoings and potentially change that? So maybe for like the Fulham game.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think it's certain. I think probably, as I've said, I think Hakim Ziyech will leave if an opportunity comes up for the player. I don't think he's in the long-term plans, and I think the club are happy to move him on. He's on significant wages. Amari Hutchinson, I think the club want to get him out on loan and want to send him on loan somewhere to play regular minutes, which is probably the best thing for him at this moment in time. He needs to be playing week in, week out, and a good loan to the Championship or something could do that for him. The club do rate him very, very highly. Graham Potter rates him very, very highly. But it's not been the easiest, I suppose, transition into the squad, I think is the phrase I would use. In terms of how I'd like it as Liverpool, I think, it's pretty certain that Kepa's going to be in goal. I don't think they're going to bring in Gabriel Slonina for this game, even though, he is in and around the training facilities, and I'm told he is impressing the coaches. Right back, I don't know if we'll go for the 3-4-3 or if we'll go to a 4 at the back against Liverpool. I'd be inclined probably to stick with the 3 at the back and go for something maybe a bit like Badia Chile, Trevor Chalobah and Thiago Silva as the back 3. Assuming that he's fit enough to play, and this is a big assumption, I would start Reece James because I think the club do look at, they look a whole cut above if you start Reece James. Yeah. If not, I'd be tempted to play Ziyech in that sort of false wing-back role, because Liverpool will get their players forward anyway, but in the jeopardy that you have, they will get players forward, but they will leave big gaps at the back, and that's something he can really exploit. On the left-hand side, it's I probably would go with Lewis Hall again, because I think Hall will dovetail quite well with Mudryk, who I'm going to put on the left wing. I think they will throw Mudryk in from the start because I think he offers that unpredictability.
Mm-hmm.
On the right-hand side, I would be tempted to probably go... I don't really want to go with Mason Mount, but I kind of almost feel they might play him in sort of that, not really on the wing, but in that sort of inside midfield role to deal with the fact that a lot of Liverpool's attacking will come down the left, because I think they'll put Harvey Elliott on that side, and also the fact they'll have Robertson overlapping. I think he'll be asked to do a job. In the centre of the midfield, I think, it picks itself at the moment with Jorginho and Kovacic. I think will probably get the nod. It might be Chukwuemeka getting the nod, although I think, he did struggle a little bit at times last week.
Is Zachary injured?
Zachary is injured, yeah. He's out for 6 weeks. So,
Okay.
and that comes on to sort of what I'll say in a minute about future post-Liverpool. And then I think Havertz probably will, get the nod up front because of the fact he did score in the last game. And again, I think he will dovetail better. It wouldn't surprise me if at some point in the game you saw a switch to a 4-2-3-1 and drop Havertz in behind into that number 10 role, and then put, Aubameyang probably on up front. Coming on past Liverpool, I think, because you're starting to now see a point when we're starting to get back towards a fully fit squad. In the next 10 days, Wesley Fofana is going to be back into training. James and Chilwell should be back to full fitness. So I think in the longer term, you're looking at something like Kepa in goal, James and Chilwell as, right back and left back. I would be tempted to go for Badiashile and Thiago Silva at centre-back. I've been really impressed with Badiashile so far in the limited evidence that we've seen of him. He looks a real promising, powerful player. As the defensive midfielder, I'm going to twist a little bit and I'll say another midfielder will come in before the end of the window. I think it'll be a defensive midfielder. I think it'll be a loan deal. And I'd put someone in there. Then I would start probably Mount and Kovacic as the number 8, as I feel like they can work quite well in that 8 position. And then on the left, I think it'll be Mudryk. Up front, I think they will go with Kai Havertz. And then on the right, it will be, I suppose, one of Madueke, Hutchinson, or any of the remaining sort of wing options. They could even, put Aubameyang through the middle and move Havertz out to the right, or move Mudryk on the right because he can play on the right, although it doesn't really play to his best strengths. I think Datra Fofana will probably go on loan by the nature of what's happened, the number of attackers that have come in. I'm told that PSV Eindhoven themselves, who have lost Gakpo and are going to lose Madueke, are quite keen on an option for him. He's the sort of player who can play across the front three, so it might be quite a sensible loan deal for Chelsea to do, and it also keeps relationships good with PSV, which is not necessarily a bad thing. Yeah. The only other thing I would say is a bit of a wild card is I think there might be someone. I think the club will look at maybe bringing in a permanent signing for a backup right back, and they'll look at a loan deal for a midfielder, because I think the midfielders they want as priority and the first choice players aren't going to be available for realistic fees in January. We've already seen Caicedo at 75 million. The big stick or twist, I suppose, for the rest of the window will be if the club do just bite the bullet on Enzo Fernandez. Now, I don't think it'll happen, but ultimately, the club may just bite the bullet on it. But I don't think they will. But at the end of the day, I don't know with the new ownership nowadays. And if it gets to, the final week of the transfer window and they haven't been able to sort out a solution elsewhere, they may just bite the bullet and accept it and work on the basis that Enzo coming in is the sort of, signing that really can elevate in the final sort of weeks of the window. Yeah. And may try and, may bite the bullet and may either really overpay in order to get favourable payment terms, or just bite the bullet and pay the release clause and then worry about FFP later. But I think that's unlikely based on what I'm told, because of the nature of how the FFP situation is. And that's one of the things with the longer contracts. I mean, even with the longer contracts at the moment with people like Madueke, for example, it's coming out at, say, X million a year. With Enzo Fernandez, including the wages in it, you're looking at still £30 million a year, even on FFP, if you agree, to pay it up front now. 30 million a year plus as on the FFP books immediately, and that's not a small amount to shift. Whereas for someone like Madueke, for example, it's 4 or 5 million, and that's a much easier amount to creatively account for.
And do you think, I don't know, it seems that we're buying a lot of players, but maybe if we were to sell players, it would help the cause a little bit?
I think there'll be a lot of sales in the summer. I've said this. I think they're preparing for a bit of a fire sale in the summer. At least one of the goalkeepers, if not both of them, will go. I think the club will make a decision on Azpilicueta in the summer because ultimately he will want to play regular minutes, and I think that's going to become increasingly sort of shortened. I think a decision will be made on Kalidou Koulibaly in the summer because ultimately that was signed by the previous manager and it was a very different signing to what they're coming to. There might be a decision to be made at left back with the fact that Ian Matson's doing very well out on loan and you can't really have three of them in the squad. You've got Jorginho out of contract. You've got Kante out of contract. I only think one of them will sign at the moment. I think it's more likely to be N'Golo Kante. Kovacic at that point will only have 12 months left on his deal, so you've got to make a decision there as well. Pulisic, Ziyech, Havertz, Aubameyang, all of those players, potentially you're looking at them leaving. I think Armando Broja will consider his position in the summer, especially if he comes back and, there's suddenly a big money striker or something coming in because, there's going to be a pecking order and a hierarchy. There's obviously also now Datro Fofana as well as competition. So I expect to see a lot of a lot of sales in the summer. And I think in the summer, the business might focus a lot more around one or two or maybe two or three key players in key positions and paying significant amounts for them rather than buying multiple players as we've seen in these last couple of windows.
Yeah.
And also work on the basis that they have, high quality youngsters like Chukwuemeka, Cesare Casadei, who the club have high hopes for, Lewis Hall, Bashir Humphreys, who all of them can play a part of sorts. And it may be a case that, you start to accept, especially if Chelsea do end up in, say, the Europa League or the Europa Conference League, as is possible at this moment in time, we have to, consider that opportunity, is that they may work on the basis that it's better keeping the young players around to play them in that competition than it is to signing players just, to bloat the squad.
Yeah. Well, it feels like Chelsea are going to have basically a completely new squad come start of next season. So just to kind of wrap this up, it's kind of turns into like a transfer extraordinaire, which is amazing. How would you rate the signing of Noni Madueke for Chelsea and maybe just the overall transfer window as well up until this point, and then what would take it to like an A+ for you?
Yeah, so I suppose on Madueke, I'll rate it out of 10 at this moment in time. I think at the moment it's a sort of 6.5 of 7 out of 10 signing.
I thought you were saying that it was a 10. I was like,
oh,
what?
No, I think it's sort of a 6.5, 7 out of 10 at the moment, in that I think there's a lot of potential there. If you can get around the injury record, then there is a phenomenal player in there, and he's only going to get better playing more and more minutes. But the injury record is a natural concern, and also you have to obviously also factor in the fact he's got to adapt to the Premier League, which is a much faster pace of football than the Eredivisie. But there is tremendous talent. It's the sort of player that could easily, if he adapts and clicks and thrives well by the end of the season, you're sort of talking about him being one of the key names on the team sheet, or at least a key name in the squad. In terms of the transfer window as a whole, I'll be harsh. I'll give it a B- at the moment.
Wow.
I think that there is a lot of good attacking quality coming in. I think, the signing of, I think Mudryk is a really good acquisition, both from a player point of view, but also from a political point of view. I think it was big to get the nod over Arsenal on that one, especially considering how well they're doing. I think it did well to unite the fan base as well at a time when they were perhaps quite fractured. And I think, I think he will be something quite impressive. I think he offers directness and pace, and that's something really that we lack. Felix is a interesting, option for 6 months. So, evaluating that depends on how much he actually does. Ideally, he doesn't get suspended again. But, if he starts to add goals and assists and starts to, add that real creative force, then you look at it and you say it was a loan deal well worth doing. If he doesn't do that, you say that's a bit of a waste of money. Madueke, Datro Fofana are players for the future. It's hard. Andre Santos, all of them, players for the future. Badiashile, I think, is a very good signing. It's someone who the club have wanted for a long time. They've, had multiple attempts at trying to sign him before in the past, both when he's been a youngster at AS Monaco and when he's been more established in the first team. They finally got their man. I think he will turn out to be a good one. In terms of what can do to take it up to an A, I think it's, pretty obvious. I think if they could bring in a real quality midfielder, just for that extra cover in there, but also something that adds a bit different. Someone like, again, I'm going to use the name Enzo Fernandez because I really would like to see him signed. I don't think he will be, but someone like an Enzo Fernandez or someone on that level of midfield that really is a wow signing. And then to me, it's a backup right back that's more in a mould of what we need from a right back. Because as good as Serve and as Azpilicueta has been for the club, and I'm one of the first people to defend that and say that. I think at this moment in time, he doesn't offer the same portfolio that we need from a right fullback, because we need them to be dynamic, we need them to be pacey, we need them to support the attack. And at this moment in time, ultimately he just can't do that anymore due to his legs. And he was never really, a dynamic attacking fullback anyway. It's silly to pretend otherwise. And I think that's what Chelsea need. So if they could get in, let's say, for argument's sake, if they brought in Enzo Fernandez and then a decent right back in on loan that fits the bill, with no obligation to buy, maybe like an option in the summer for a cheap amount to see how he does, or if they triggered, a release clause of someone like Josip Juranovic at Celtic, who's low cost and very low risk in my opinion, then that probably is what you do to elevate it.
Amazing. Well, I really hope that the Enzo deal gets done. Maybe it doesn't, but
I'll go out on a record and say I think there's about 0.0000000000001% chance it'll happen.
Maybe in the summer. Maybe.
Yeah, in the summer it's possible. I mean, Benfica, after this window ends, I'm pretty confident Benfica will try and tie him down to a new contract to remove that release clause, and they will try and set a new absurd one at 200, 300 million. Because they will not want to lose the player for that fee in the summer. Because in the summer window, there will be, 4, 5, 6 clubs that will immediately come and pay that. And this is the difference between Enzo Fernandez and Jude Bellingham. As I've said to people, with Enzo Fernandez, there is that, price that is the jeopardy hanging over his head that if someone pays that, they can't do anything. With Jude Bellingham, Dortmund can just, happily invite auctions and make it into an auction because he's got the long-term contract and they've got, the leverage over the player.
Yeah. Interesting. Well, Rob, thank you so much for coming on. I really, really appreciate it. Love hearing your insight as always. And let everybody know where they can find you.
Yeah, so I'll plug 2 places actually. At the moment, you can also find me doing stuff for Atta F-Ball on Twitter. I've recently started my new job with Atta as their transfer specialist, mainly focusing on the women's game. But yeah, there's a lot more business still to be done in this window, and I still think Chelsea themselves will make at least one more signing in this window, potentially someone quite exciting. And then if you want to find myself, it's at RJP Journalism on Twitter.
Amazing. Well, guys, I really hope that you enjoyed this episode. Let me know what you think about Madueke signing for Chelsea and Chelsea's transfer window in general. And I'll ask the question to you, what would make this transfer window an A+ or a 10 in your eyes? Hope you guys have a great rest of your day, evening, whatever time you're watching this. And until next time, I'm out. Bye.